Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Nerdy Tarot. Today I've got I got the moon as the obstacle. It's a pretty big obstacle, and the ten of sticks, ten of wands as the opportunity. So, getting started with the moon here. One of the interesting differences that I just want to point out between the Rider Waite Smith deck that we see here and the deck of Marseille is that not in this card, but in this card's uh, digital uh, decimal counterpart, the major arcanum number 8. Waite decided to change the Justice card to the Strength card and vice versa. So the number 8 card in the Marseille is Justice, but in the Waite, it's Strength. It's kind of it's kind of an interesting trade, and I would say it's pretty significant because I think these cards uh, do a good deal to illustrate how interacting with the experiences depicted in the pip cards and the number cards can manifest themselves on us and how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. It's one of my theories about the tarot deck. So it's interesting here to note that the sort of the counterpart, the brother or sister, the sibling card of this card in this deck is Strength, even though I kind of see it as Justice, and I think a lot of my reading into it will kind of be making those presumptions. But yeah, so with the moon, this is I think this is dreaminess, nighttime, all the animal nature, the subconscious. The subconscious comes out in dreams. That kind of state. You know, generally, unless you're lucid dreaming, you don't really you don't really consciously control your dreams. It's your fears and desires that kind of play themselves out against this changing landscape that your mind creates. Or that much is still not. There's still a lot that's not known about dreams. It's pretty fascinating, but yeah. So I think this card depicts that subconscious, especially the is it a crayfish, lobster, uh, coming out of the depths, old, really old creature. It's like I feel like it kind of symbolizes the brain stem and all these, not even mammal instincts, but just these like old, deep, weird things that could be, their instincts and impulses and aspects of the subconscious that could be almost disgusting or terrifying based on how distant they are from where we are consciously, right? Like sometimes you can see people act in a way where they are almost entirely consumed by their unconscious, and it could be a really terrifying or strange experience to see someone just acting out these base desires unfiltered through, the conscious ego. Um, and yeah, I think there's a dog here and a wolf or a fox maybe, and dogs are mammals. They're domesticated, so I think it's kind of symbolic of we have some control over the animal impulse, and then wolves and foxes, they're wild. They're not really domesticated, and then that crayfish or lobster. It's just like that's just a totally weird. I mean, I wonder if anyone has a pet lobster that has been trained in any way. I'm really curious if they're capable of domestication. Um, but yeah, and so I think this card just pretty strongly symbolizes the unconscious mind, those kind of animal urges that are still, they're we still have big chunks of the brain that are just really really primitive. I think that the opportunities, of this card are many. There's tapping into especially your dreams. There's so many amazing ideas, so many creative breakthroughs that you could have. You can gain insight into reality because it's very common that we see or experience things on a daily basis that either because we're not expecting to see or experience them or because we just don't really know how to process them. um, we're almost completely unaware of them, and sometimes they need to be kind of filtered through the unconscious. They need to bubble up in our dreams for us to become aware of them. So it could be a great source of awareness about the real world in a way. But I think in this case, as an obstacle, it represents uh, the kind of lack of you know that conversation between the subconscious and the conscious. I think it could be someone who is. I think it could symbolize the state of someone who is unable to differentiate the subconscious from the conscious, or someone who gives a certain type of validity to subconscious impulses, or yeah, essentially fails to respect the subconscious for what it is and what it does, and simultaneously fail to respect the conscious for what it is and it does, to kind of you know keep those things separated. And yeah, some interaction, some conversation between the two can be really beneficial and fruitful. But yeah, I think this could symbolize something like being really deluded or misguided because of the kind of dreams that you have, the kind of subconscious animal urges and motivations that you have. I think, you know, could symbolize something like making the mistake of uh, thinking that because you feel a certain way because something either let's say scares you or uh, makes you love something, that that experience accurately symbolizes the reality of a situation. There's it's it's pretty common for people that obsess romantically, sometimes to a dangerous degree, to the point where they do weird, you know, criminal activities, essentially like stalking, assaulting people or whatever. Often those individuals, it's like they feel really in love with someone, they feel really enamored with someone, and it's that experience, it's that individual, experience that convinces them that is actually the reality, that other person that they're just fantasizing about feels that way, because they can't separate that individual in reality from their, I guess, like avatar, in their mind, how they imagine that person. Um, and so yeah, so something like being attracted or enamored with someone could go out of control. Having having fears of a person or a group of people, because in your fantasies, in your mind, you imagine them all to be, you know, aggressive or threatening or whatever, and like in reality, maybe that person isn't like that at all. Maybe that person doesn't even know who you are or that you exist, but because in your mind, that's such a strong reality, spills over into what you think of the world, starts to affect affect what kind of decisions you make. And I think it's important to point out that, you know, in my opinion anyway, none of us live in reality. None of us actually interface with reality. We're all interacting with our own virtual model of what we think reality is, and we're constantly updating that model. A big part of what we very loosely describe as growing up and becoming an adult is settling on a model of the world, you know, uh, ending the stage at which you're constantly reevaluating and experimenting with different theories on what the world model should be. what people are like. People who say, "Oh, I think people are ultimately assholes," and then a year later they're like, "No, wait, no, I think people are ultimately good." And maybe you grow up a little bit more, and then you realize, well, people aren't even a thing. There's a bunch of individuals, and they're all different, and applying any sort of broad heuristic is going to make me miss out on the most amount of opportunities when interacting with reality. Um, but yeah, so like growing up, becoming an adult, subscribing to often it's there's a cultural pressure to subscribe to the common worldview so that everyone interacting in, let's say, one geographic area will be on the same page insofar as how they interpret certain actions, certain behaviors, how you dress, whatever, things like that. Um, so yeah, so without a doubt, I think we all you know, to an extent interact with this, or we only interact with this model. And two, I think, like ideally, I think if you're healthy, well adjusted, I'm doing air quotes, then then your model is your model is pretty close to reality. Um, but yeah, I think this card symbolizes the obstacle of having your model be more fantastical and personal and subconscious, just like your subconscious, and not based on shared ideas. And in a sense, that culturally shared model is also like a shared collective unconscious, right? Like it's not like it's not like people get together and explicitly go over all of the presumptions they make about reality of their world model. It's more like as you grow up, you just start, assimilating and ingesting these assumptions. But yeah, I think the obstacle here, or yeah, I would say consider how much of what you believe is matching up with reality pretty well. That's usually the first sign of if things aren't going your way, if interactions with people aren't turning out the way you want them to. You make plans to go hang out with someone, have a good time, then you end up getting into a fight. That's generally a pretty clear indicator that you're not interacting with them using as up to date of a model of them as you could be, that you're kind of interacting with them in the sense where your model is kind of this like fantasy. Yeah, and just in terms of, and then on the larger scale, just your kind of world model in general. The obstacle here is like living in a dream. You're living in a fantasy, and we're all living in a fantasy, but this implies that your fantasy just doesn't match up with reality. And then the opportunity. This one's interesting. I kind of often this is seen as like a great burden. It's interpreted that way. Next card is the Ace of Swords, by the way. Great burden. Great burden eventually might lead to spontaneous awareness of some idea or maybe some question. Maybe like, why am I doing this? uh, no, but yeah, I think I kind of see this. I see all of the tens as symbolizing becoming completely consumed with the theme of that particular suit. So with wands, I see it as creative, um, instinctive, similar, possibly motivated by these kinds of mood, subconscious, animalistic urges. But I see it as like automatic movement, unlike the sword suit, which deals with, I would say, conscious thought and abstraction. It's like the actions in the wands, I don't think are premeditated very much, or at least I think wands describe moments in which people are committing actions that aren't premeditated. They're zen-like flow state. You're it's some sort of gesture or act where you're inspired, you feel compelled, you're just driven by this thing. So often, I think this means that wands express themselves in activities that are related to sexual desires, uh, or these kinds of creative, like the desire to. I mean, why do it's such an interesting question. Like, why do artists create? It, I feel like there's like a proto scientific urge to try and sort of capture reality, but the artist goes about doing that without really engaging in language. It's just, I have a feeling. How can I translate that feeling into vibrations in the air, into sounds, or into colors and shapes, right? I think often we can I think often we could tell the difference pretty clearly between art that has been created as a byproduct of thinking and hacking. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of art where it's just like, okay, clearly I see that this is, there's use of symbols here. Like these tarot cards are a good example, I think. Like they communicate pretty clearly. And then there's art where you look at it and the sort of conscious part of your mind can't really describe it in words, but you get an immediate and very specific kind of transferal of feeling, experience, mood, aesthetics. Um, but yeah, so as far as that representing, uh, or as far as wands representing those kinds of acts, the sexual, the creative, those kind of actions of sublimation. I think the 10 represents getting to a point where you've essentially reached the pinnacle. You've completed your journey in uh, mastering this kind of activity. And at this point you are in this perfect automatic state. This is like the the 10,000, I think yeah, it's 10,000 hours, uh, that is often said it's the amount of time required for you to do any particular thing to become a master of it. And I think that mastery, that amount of time, I think it specifically relates to how long it takes for how much repetition of a particular task does it take for your brain to rewire itself and reinforce certain pathways, certain synapses, so that you could perform those actions just automatically. They're just you're just on you're on autopilot, and you could perform certain actions or tasks better than anyone else, and you don't even really have to think about it while you do it. And I think in this sense, this represents, yeah, if you're doing a certain kind of work, any kind of manual labor. You may be familiar with videos of, like, I remember the last impressive one that I saw was somebody who works at a post office who cuts out and assembles boxes. People bring something in, they're like, I want to mail this, they don't have a box for yet. This person makes them a custom sized box, and he is just incredible at successfully estimating the size of the box that will be necessary to make, and then makes it. He's just got an X-Acto knife in one hand, he's got some tape in the other, they're flying around, he's like a juggler. Within seconds he's spinning this thing around, it looks like he's weaving a cocoon. He's got this box, the box is assembled, and he takes the item, puts it inside, and it like fits perfectly, like it just slides in. I think this symbolizes something like that. And it could also be, as far as art is concerned, I think this would symbolize the kind of person who has attained level of that kind of level of automation or skill in like a repeatable craft. One thing that comes to mind for me is, I know a couple people in Toronto who are, I don't know. I don't know if you would classify them as buskers or panhandlers or street peddlers, street sellers of art. You know, but yeah, I know a couple of people that they sit around and they just make little works of art all day long. They just knock them out one after another, and they're all unique, they're all different, but they have like mastered a particular aesthetic style or theme. There's this one woman that I see quite regularly. She does like kind of, I don't know, like indigenous northern North American kind of, just animals, but they all have this certain aesthetic style. And yeah, it's someone who has so fully internalized that type of style, that type of process. They're just knocking them out. I remember seeing a guy once who did sand arrangement in little glass bottles, and he was just like, you want to describe them like this person's like a machine. They're just, it's uncanny how masterful they are in that particular task. Um, the disadvantages of something like this, for one, is that this state is generally all consuming. You know, aces of the suits kind of represent this unlimited potential, which is also the state of great volatility. So it's like anything could happen, but anything could happen. There's no order yet. You've got your direction picked out. The ace, I think, aims you in a direction, but it doesn't offer any specific way of doing it. With the tens, it's like you no longer have any aims, and what you are is this human. You're this human manifestation of this task completing, bringing itself to completion over and over and over. It's like you're possessed by whatever the product is that you are creating at that point. And so, in a lot of ways, that could be a disadvantage. Ah, damn it! Had a phone call. It completely broke my train of thought. If I remember correctly, what I was saying was along the lines of the 10 symbolizing, in the process of symbolizing this perfect attainment and accumulation of this particular drive or skill or creative process, that opposite to the swords that have all this opportunity, the 10 is essentially completely restrictive. It's complete order. It completely imposes itself on you, so that you essentially have no freedom. There's only, like those artists that have fully taken on that aesthetic style. It's like they are unable to, at that point, they are trapped within that aesthetic style. They can't just do some other style, because I mean they could, but it would take a lot of effort, conscious effort, which would, I mean, it would essentially slow them down to a halt, right? Their whole advantage is that they're so fast and so specialized now. Music, if you learn to play any instrument, you learn to play in a specific way, and that means that you're limited to only being able to play certain things, only be able to play in certain keys, right? It's like if you want to actually create something genuinely new, something that hasn't been done, it's like you have to unlearn everything you learned just to be able to actually do new things, because otherwise you're limited to this thing. So while that is a disadvantage, here we're looking at the advantages, and I think one of the awesome advantages of this is just the experience of being engaged in an activity that you feel yourself being completely consumed in, and it's almost like you could, on some level, you could watch yourself perform these actions and have this incredible feeling of like, oh, it's such a meaningful kind of experience to have, where to see yourself, just be that proficient at something. And I think everyone has something like this. I think a lot of people don't give themselves enough credit for having mastery, because they often look around. And in some ways, I think all of these pip cards represent, what you see. They're like little windows. Like you look outside and you see this guy hauling these sticks, and he's totally consumed in his task. But at the same time, it's like he's really good at what he's doing. It's like he's a master of hauling those sticks, those wands. And so I think sometimes the experience could be like, oh, I don't have any mastery. I don't have any comparable skill. And you do, but it can be pretty easy to think, well, yeah, but the thing I'm good at is like, I'm good at playing video games. I'm good at making corny dad jokes. I don't know. I'm trying to think of things that people often don't give themselves enough credit for. Uh, but but yeah. So I think a big part of the opportunity here could be to recognize within yourself that the things that you have mastery over, the things that think about the last time you had that experience of seeing yourself create or do something. Uh, Becoming aware of the fact that you're like a possessed being. You're possessed with this sort of spirit that's animating you. Uh, that whatever the last flow state you had, to think back on that and then maybe give yourself a little bit more credit for that being something that someone somewhere would be envious of, or that somewhere it could be a highly sought after thing. Um, and this isn't necessarily to say, oh, you got the opportunity to you know get a job or something like that. But I think in one sense it's an opportunity to potentially experience the satisfaction and that kind of that sense of meaning, which is always nice. People could go for long stretches of time without feeling like they have any real place in the world, or like what they do doesn't really matter, and that's not great. Um, yeah, the other opportunity I think is kind of like what I already touched on, is in the sense that this card could be interpreted as looking out onto the world and seeing this. I think I think it could be the opportunity to not look like, often if you feel like you don't have anything to contribute, even as a robot, even as a machine, it's pretty common to subconsciously feel animosity towards people who are exhibiting mastery or talent. To feel animosity and distaste for that, and then to sort of lash out impulsively without even really thinking about it, but to sort of to have a response to that, which is along the lines of, this person's talent is irrelevant because they're doing a really stupid fucking job and they're just robots, and who cares, right? I think in you know in consideration of that, I think the opportunity here could also be to be appreciative, to find appreciation and admiration and respect for all those people displaying talents and all those different things, and that could have plenty of really cool benefits. I mean, one of them being is that you being impressed with how well someone does something can reinvigorate them. You could be like, "Holy shit, you're really good at that," and meanwhile, they could be thinking, "This stupid thing that I never thought this was a meaningful thing." Uh, but in a sense, more importantly, or at least more importantly for you, um, I think it's in acknowledging that, being able to see that in the world. Um, I think it increases the likelihood that you could feel inspired and energized by the prospect of finding and pursuing your own thing. I mean, I would much rather live in a world where when I look around, I see I see a bunch of people that are shining examples of all the amazing things that human beings can achieve when they dedicate themselves to a particular task. Um, and I'd like to see that any task, no matter how menial, presents the opportunity for mastery, for this beautiful artistic expression. Those ice cream. I don't know if you ever see those guys who serve ice cream, and they fuck with the people buying it. It looks like they're handing them the cone, but it turns out it's two cones. So they pull the ice cream out, the person is stuck with an empty cone, and like think about that. That's a guy selling ice cream. But at that point, is he really an ice cream vendor, or is he this juggler magician, right? Like, at that point, his mastery redefines the very job that he's doing, right? I feel like I'd rather live in a world where every menial job has the opportunity to be transformed in that kind of expression of that individual's creative energy. Um, so yeah, I think the opportunity is there for that. Thanks for watching. Drop me a like if you enjoyed the video. Also, I invite you to comment hashtag free reading to be entered into a draw for a free one-on-one tarot reading. I'll be back tomorrow. Take care.